Queen Elizabeth II. What an extraordinary life she led. Can you imagine reigning for 70 years in a world that changed so drastically? From post-war recovery to the digital revolution, her steadfast presence was a beacon of stability, a constant in an ever-shifting landscape. She witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the Cold War's icy grip giving way to glasnost, and the dawn of a hyper-connected age where information travels at the speed of light. Through it all, she remained a symbol of continuity, dignity, and quiet resolve. Yet, among all her encounters with global leaders, from presidents and prime ministers to kings and queens, her meetings with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama stand out as moments of profound significance. Why? Because they were not just diplomatic exchanges. They were bridges between cultures, philosophies, and even spiritual realms. Think about this. Queen Elizabeth II represented an institution steeped in centuries of tradition, bound by duty, protocol, and history. The British monarchy is, in many ways, a living artifact of Western civilization, a relic of feudalism transformed into a modern constitutional framework. And yet, here she was, engaging with a man whose very existence challenges the boundaries of time, space, and governance. The Dalai Lama, a man who embodies peace, compassion, and resilience, has spent decades advocating for Tibetan autonomy while inspiring millions worldwide. Born into a humble family in rural Tibet, he rose to become both a spiritual leader and a political figurehead, navigating exile, loss, and relentless adversity with grace and unwavering optimism. His philosophy of nonviolence, rooted in Buddhist teachings, has resonated far beyond the Himalayas, touching hearts across continents and generations. But here's the question. How does one navigate such a delicate relationship when geopolitical tensions loom large? Consider the enormity of the stakes. On one side, you have China, a rising superpower with immense economic influence, viewing any interaction with the Dalai Lama as a direct affront to its sovereignty over Tibet. On the other side, you have the United Kingdom, a nation striving to balance its historical ties to human rights advocacy with its contemporary need for strong trade relations with Beijing. In this complex web of interests, how does a monarch like Queen Elizabeth II engage meaningfully without causing diplomatic ruptures? What does it say about her leadership style that she chose to meet with the Dalai Lama privately, ensuring respect for his cause while avoiding overt provocation? And what can we learn from these interactions about leadership, humanity, and our shared responsibility to uplift others? Leadership, after all, is not merely about wielding power or making decisions. It's about forging connections, building trust, and leaving a legacy that transcends individual lifetimes. When Queen Elizabeth II welcomed the Dalai Lama to Buckingham Palace in 1996, she wasn't just fulfilling a ceremonial obligation. She was sending a message, one that spoke to the universal values of compassion, tolerance, and mutual understanding. These are principles that resonate deeply in today's fractured world, where division often seems more pronounced than unity. Let us dive into this remarkable story, one that transcends politics and touches the very essence of what it means to be human. At its core, this narrative is about two individuals who, despite their vastly different backgrounds, found common ground in their commitment to service and humanity. It's about the courage to stand firm in your convictions while remaining open to dialogue. It's about recognizing that true progress comes not from confrontation, but from collaboration, not from isolation, but from connection. Imagine the scene. A grand hall within Buckingham Palace, adorned with centuries of art and history, where East meets West in a quiet moment of reflection. Here, a queen and a monk sit together, not as adversaries, but as fellow travelers on the journey toward a better world. They discuss compassion, spirituality, and the preservation of cultural heritage. They share stories, insights, and perhaps even laughter. In those fleeting minutes, something extraordinary happens. An invisible thread is woven between them, linking their struggles, hopes, and dreams. This thread stretches beyond borders, ideologies, and belief systems, reminding us that no matter how divided we may seem, there is always a path toward reconciliation if we choose to walk it. So, as we delve deeper into this story, let us ask ourselves, what does it mean to lead with empathy? How do we balance pragmatism with idealism in our own lives? And most importantly, how can each of us contribute to creating a world where compassion triumphs over conflict and understanding prevails over ignorance? For in the end, isn't that what truly defines us? Not the titles we hold or the roles we play, but the impact we leave on the hearts and minds of others. Historical context of their relationship. The Dalai Lama's role in global politics born. In 1935, the Dalai Lama became Tibet's spiritual leader at the tender age of 4. Imagine carrying such immense responsibility so early in life. When China invaded Tibet in 1950, he fled to India in 1959 after a failed uprising. Since then, he has lived in exile, tirelessly advocating for Tibetan autonomy and human rights. Isn't it awe-inspiring how someone can turn personal suffering into a global mission for peace? His journey from a young boy thrust into leadership to an internationally recognized advocate for compassion and nonviolence is nothing short of extraordinary. His advocacy for nonviolence earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. But here lies the paradox. While the world celebrates him as a moral authority, China views him as a threat to its sovereignty. What does this duality teach us about perception versus reality? About the courage required to stand by your principles, even when faced with opposition. This tension between idealism and pragmatism defines much of modern diplomacy. And the Dalai Lama's life serves as a case study in navigating these complexities. To truly understand the Dalai Lama's role in global politics, we must delve deeper into his philosophy. Central to his teachings is the concept of compassionate action, the idea that every individual has the power to contribute positively to the world. This philosophy resonates deeply with people across cultures, religions, and ideologies. Yet, it also places him at odds with authoritarian regimes like China, which prioritize control over freedom. For China, the Dalai Lama represents not just a political challenge, but a symbolic one. A figure who embodies resistance to centralized authority and champions values that undermine their narrative of unity and stability. The Dalai Lama's vision extends far beyond Tibet. He advocates for environmental sustainability, interfaith dialogue, and education reform. In many ways, he represents a universal ideal, the belief that humanity can transcend divisions through understanding and cooperation. But how does this ideal translate into practical diplomacy? And what happens when nations prioritize economic interests over ethical considerations? Consider the broader implications of his work. The Dalai Lama's emphasis on environmental stewardship aligns with global efforts to combat climate change. His calls for interfaith harmony resonate in a world increasingly fractured by religious conflict. And his focus on education reform underscores the importance of nurturing future generations to think critically and act compassionately. These initiatives reflect a holistic approach to leadership, one that seeks to address root causes rather than symptoms. Yet, the Dalai Lama's global influence comes at a cost. His advocacy for Tibetan autonomy has made him a polarizing figure, particularly in the eyes of Beijing. China accuses him of fomenting separatism, while supporters see him as a champion of justice and self-determination. This dichotomy raises important questions about the role of morality in international relations. Should leaders prioritize ethical imperatives over geopolitical realities? Or is compromise inevitable in a world where power often trumps principle? Queen Elizabeth II's diplomatic role. As a constitutional monarch, Queen Elizabeth II may not have wielded direct political power, but oh, how she mastered the art of symbolic diplomacy. She hosted countless state visits, attended summits, and met with leaders from every corner of the globe. Her ability to balance tradition, protocol, and pragmatism made her a true stateswoman. But consider this. In meeting the Dalai Lama, was she merely fulfilling her duty as head of state? Or was she also embracing her role as a custodian of universal values? Perhaps both. After all, isn't leadership ultimately about finding harmony between duty and conscience? To fully appreciate the Queen's diplomatic acumen, we must examine her approach to soft power. Unlike elected officials, who often operate within the constraints of party politics, the monarchy provides a neutral platform for fostering international goodwill. The Queen understood this implicitly. Through gestures like hosting the Dalai Lama, she demonstrated the UK's commitment to humanitarian values without explicitly challenging China's sovereignty over Tibet. This subtle balancing act highlights the unique role of the monarchy in navigating sensitive diplomatic terrain. Her reign coincided with some of the most turbulent periods in modern history: the Cold War, decolonization, globalization, and the rise of new superpowers. Each era presented unique challenges, requiring adaptability and foresight. For instance, during the Cold War, the Queen played a crucial role in strengthening ties with Commonwealth nations, many of which were newly independent. Similarly, her engagements with figures like Nelson Mandela underscored her commitment to racial equality and social justice. Yet, the Queen's interactions with the Dalai Lama were particularly nuanced. They highlighted her ability to navigate sensitive situations without compromising core principles. By framing their meetings as private or semi-private encounters, she struck a delicate balance between symbolism and pragmatism. This approach not only preserved diplomatic relations with China, but also reinforced the monarchy's relevance in an increasingly interconnected world. Let's explore this further. The Queen's decision to meet the Dalai Lama privately reflects a broader strategy of using discretion as a tool of diplomacy. In doing so, she acknowledged the sensitivities surrounding his status, while affirming the importance of engaging with individuals whose work aligns with universal values. This dual approach, respectful yet resolute, exemplifies the art of quiet diplomacy. It reminds us that sometimes the most impactful actions are those performed behind closed doors, away from the glare of public scrutiny. Moreover, the Queen's interactions with the Dalai Lama reveal her deep understanding of cultural exchange. By welcoming him into Buckingham Palace, she created a space where East meets West, a moment of mutual respect and shared humanity. Such encounters transcend mere protocol. They embody the spirit of dialogue and collaboration that defines effective leadership. In reflecting on the historical context of their relationship, we see two figures who, despite operating in vastly different spheres, share a common purpose: to uplift humanity. Whether through the Dalai Lama's teachings of compassion or the Queen's embodiment of service, their legacies remind us that true leadership is not about wielding power. It's about empowering others. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Details of their meetings. First meeting in 1996. Their first documented meeting took place in 1996 during a private audience at Buckingham Palace. A private meeting, you say? Yes, indeed. Likely to avoid provoking China. Yet, doesn't it speak volumes that such a quiet encounter could carry such weight? The decision to frame this interaction as private rather than official was not merely a matter of protocol. It was a calculated move designed to balance respect for the Dalai Lama's mission with the delicate geopolitical realities of the time. For 20 minutes, they discussed themes of compassion, spirituality, and cultural preservation. Just think about that for a moment. Two individuals from vastly different worlds. One representing an ancient monarchy steeped in tradition, the other embodying the spiritual legacy of Tibetan Buddhism, united by their commitment to higher ideals. Doesn't it remind us that meaningful connections often transcend boundaries? This brief yet profound exchange underscores the power of dialogue to bridge divides, even when those divides seem insurmountable. To understand the significance of this meeting, we must consider the broader context. At the time, China was emerging as a major global player, and Western nations were eager to strengthen economic ties. Hosting the Dalai Lama, even privately, risked alienating Beijing. Yet, the Queen chose to proceed, recognizing the importance of engaging with a figure whose work aligned with universal values. Her willingness to host him reflects not only her diplomatic acumen, but also her personal conviction that moral leadership requires taking principled stands, however subtle or understated. What did they discuss during those 20 minutes? While no official transcript exists, it's likely they explored topics such as mindfulness, meditation, and the role of spirituality in modern society. These conversations would have resonated deeply with the Queen, whose faith played a central role in her life. As Supreme Governor of the Church of England, she was deeply committed to promoting religious tolerance and interfaith dialogue. Imagine the richness of their exchange. A Christian monarch discussing shared spiritual principles with a Buddhist leader who has dedicated his life to fostering peace and understanding. Such moments are rare but invaluable, offering glimpses into how seemingly disparate traditions can find common ground. The setting itself adds another layer of meaning. Buckingham Palace, with its opulent halls and centuries of history, served as a fitting backdrop for this historic encounter. Here, amidst symbols of British heritage, two figures engaged in a conversation that transcended national borders and cultural differences. It was not just a meeting between individuals, but a confluence of ideas, values, and aspirations. A testament to the enduring human desire for connection and mutual understanding. Subsequent encounters. Over the years, their paths crossed again, most notably during an interfaith service at St. Paul's Cathedral in 2008. This event celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a fitting occasion for two figures who championed tolerance and understanding. The choice of venue was significant. St. Paul's Cathedral, an iconic symbol of London's resilience and spiritual depth, provided a neutral space where diverse voices could come together in harmony. And yet, how many more private audiences might have occurred behind closed doors? We may never know. But isn't there something beautiful about the mystery? It reminds us that some acts of diplomacy are best performed quietly, away from the glare of public scrutiny. In an age dominated by social media and instant communication, these discreet interactions stand as reminders that true diplomacy often thrives in silence and subtlety. Each subsequent encounter added layers of meaning to their relationship. For example, during the 2008 interfaith service, the Dalai Lama delivered a powerful message about the interconnectedness of all beings. His words echoed the Queen's own emphasis on unity and service. Together, they exemplified the transformative potential of collaboration between seemingly disparate traditions. Consider the symbolism of this moment. A Buddhist monk standing alongside a Christian monarch, both united in their call for compassion and justice. It was a vivid illustration of how shared values can transcend religious and cultural differences. These encounters also highlight the evolving nature of their relationship. Over time, their interactions became less about formalities and more about genuine engagement. Each meeting allowed them to deepen their understanding of one another's perspectives and reinforce their shared commitment to humanity. Whether through private conversations or public appearances, they consistently demonstrated that leadership is not about titles or positions. It's about fostering connections and inspiring others to act with integrity and empathy. Reflecting on these moments, we see how personal relationships can shape international dynamics. The Queen's meetings with the Dalai Lama were not just symbolic gestures. They were deliberate acts of diplomacy aimed at promoting understanding and goodwill. They remind us that even in a world rife with conflict and division, there is always room for dialogue, and that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the greatest impact. Diplomatic sensitivities and challenges. China's reaction. China, the elephant in the room. Whenever the Dalai Lama visited the UK, Chinese officials protested vehemently, warning of strained relations. Doesn't this highlight the fragility of international diplomacy? One misstep, and decades of goodwill can unravel. The mere presence of the Dalai Lama on British soil was enough to provoke Beijing, underscoring how deeply entrenched the Tibetan issue is within China's national identity and geopolitical strategy. For China, any engagement with the Dalai Lama, whether public or private, is seen as an implicit endorsement of his political aspirations for Tibetan autonomy, which they equate to separatism. But here's a philosophical question. Should nations prioritize economic interests over ethical considerations? Or is there a way to strike a balance? The British government certainly tried, framing the Dalai Lama's visits as private or semi-private engagements. Was this cowardice or wisdom? To answer this question, we must delve deeper into the complexities of Sino-British relations and the broader implications of such decisions. To answer this question, we must examine the broader dynamics of Sino-British relations. During the late 20th and early 21st centuries, China emerged as a dominant force in global trade. Its rapid economic growth created opportunities for Western nations, but also vulnerabilities. Any perceived slight against Beijing could result in lost investments, cancelled contracts, or diplomatic isolation. Consider the stakes. By the early 2000s, China had become one of the UK's largest trading partners, with billions of pounds tied up in exports, imports, and joint ventures. In such a context, even symbolic gestures, like hosting the Dalai Lama, could carry significant consequences. Against this backdrop, the Queen's meetings with the Dalai Lama took on added significance. By hosting him discreetly, she signaled support for his cause without jeopardizing bilateral relations. This strategy reflects a timeless principle of diplomacy. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. Yet, it also raises important questions about the limits of discretion. At what point does caution become complicity? And how do leaders navigate the fine line between pragmatism and principle? The British approach to managing these sensitivities reveals much about the art of diplomacy. By framing the Dalai Lama's visits as low-key, apolitical events, the UK sought to minimize fallout while still acknowledging his contributions to global peace and spirituality. This balancing act required careful coordination between the monarchy, the government, and other stakeholders. It also highlighted the unique role of the monarchy in providing a neutral platform for engagement, one that could operate independently of partisan politics while still serving the national interest. Public perception. Despite efforts to downplay their significance, the Queen's meetings with the Dalai Lama resonated deeply with the public. Many saw them as affirmations of universal values like compassion and tolerance. For ordinary citizens, these encounters symbolized something greater than protocol or politics. They represented a commitment to humanity itself. The image of a revered monarch meeting with a spiritual leader who embodies peace struck a chord with people around the world, reinforcing the idea that leadership is not just about power, but about purpose. But critics argued otherwise, claiming they undermined Britain's economic interests in China. So, which side do you find yourself leaning toward? Do you believe in standing firm for your principles, no matter the cost? Or do you see merit in pragmatic compromise? Public opinion on this issue remains divided. Some view the Queen's actions as courageous, arguing that moral leadership requires taking risks. Others see them as impractical, suggesting that realpolitik should take precedence over idealism. Ultimately, the debate reflects a larger tension between ethics and expediency, a tension that defines much of modern diplomacy. Let's explore this further. Those who admire the Queen's approach often point to her ability to transcend short-term calculations in favor of long-term vision. By engaging with the Dalai Lama, even discreetly, she affirmed the importance of human rights, religious freedom, and cultural preservation. These are values that resonate deeply with many people, particularly in democratic societies where individual liberties are cherished. For supporters, her actions demonstrated that true leadership involves making choices that align with one's core beliefs, even when those choices come at a cost. On the other hand, critics argue that the Queen's meetings were naive or reckless, potentially jeopardizing vital economic ties with China. They contend that in an era defined by globalization and interdependence, nations cannot afford to let moral considerations override strategic imperatives. From this perspective, the UK's cautious handling of the Dalai Lama's visits was not only prudent but necessary to safeguard national interests. Ultimately, the debate boils down to a fundamental question. What is the purpose of diplomacy? Is it to advance narrow self-interest? Or is it to promote shared values and collective well-being? The Queen's interactions with the Dalai Lama offer no easy answers, but they do provide a compelling case study in navigating this tension. Her ability to strike a balance, acknowledging the Dalai Lama's cause without alienating Beijing, exemplifies the delicate art of statesmanship. Moreover, public perception of these meetings underscores the evolving nature of leadership in the modern world. In an age of instant communication and heightened scrutiny, every action taken by public figures is subject to interpretation and judgment. The Queen's meetings with the Dalai Lama remind us that leadership is not just about making decisions. It's about shaping narratives and inspiring others to see the bigger picture, whether viewed as acts of courage or pragmatism. These encounters continue to spark conversations about the role of morality in international affairs and the enduring power of personal diplomacy to bridge divides. Broader implications of their relationship cultural exchange. These meetings exemplified the beauty of cross-cultural exchange. Think about it. The British monarchy and Tibetan Buddhism, two ancient institutions representing continuity and wisdom. Together, they bridged East and West, fostering greater understanding between diverse traditions. Isn't it fascinating how shared values can unite people across time and space? Compassion, unity, and non-violence. Are these not ideals that resonate universally? To fully grasp the cultural implications of their relationship, we must consider the historical parallels between the monarchy and Tibetan Buddhism. Both institutions emphasize service, humility, and stewardship. Both have endured centuries of change while remaining steadfast in their core missions. And both continue to inspire millions around the world. Yet, their meeting was more than just a symbolic gesture. It was a profound affirmation of the universal human desire for connection and mutual understanding. Consider the deeper layers of this cultural exchange. The British monarchy, with its roots in feudalism and its evolution into a constitutional framework, represents a blend of tradition and modernity. It serves as a living link to the past while adapting to the needs of contemporary society. Similarly, Tibetan Buddhism, despite centuries of external pressures and internal transformations, has preserved its spiritual essence while embracing new contexts and audiences. When Queen Elizabeth II and the Dalai Lama came together, they embodied this delicate balance between preserving heritage and engaging with the present. Their interactions also highlight the transformative potential of cross-cultural dialogue. By engaging with one another, they demonstrated that cultural differences are not barriers, but opportunities for growth. For instance, the Dalai Lama's teachings on mindfulness and compassion resonated deeply with the Queen's own emphasis on duty and service. These shared principles transcended cultural and religious boundaries, offering a model for how individuals, and by extension, societies, can find common ground despite their differences. Moreover, their meetings underscored the importance of preserving cultural heritage in an increasingly globalized world. In an era where homogenization threatens local traditions, figures like the Queen and the Dalai Lama remind us of the value of safeguarding unique identities while fostering inclusivity. Their example encourages us to celebrate diversity without losing sight of our shared humanity. Humanitarian advocacy beyond symbolism. Both leaders used their platforms to champion humanitarian causes. The Dalai Lama focused on human rights and environmental sustainability, while the Queen dedicated her life to charitable endeavors. Doesn't their example inspire us to ask ourselves, what legacy will we leave behind? Their shared commitment to service serves as a reminder that leadership is not about wielding power. It's about empowering others. Whether through small acts of kindness or large-scale initiatives, each of us has the capacity to make a difference. But let's delve deeper into the specific ways their humanitarian efforts intersected and complemented one another. The Dalai Lama's advocacy for human rights and environmental sustainability aligns closely with the Queen's lifelong dedication to public service. For example, his calls for global cooperation to address climate change echo the Queen's support for initiatives like the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy, which aims to protect forests and promote biodiversity. Similarly, His emphasis on compassion and nonviolence mirrors her quiet, yet unwavering commitment to fostering unity and understanding within the Commonwealth and beyond. What makes their humanitarian advocacy particularly compelling is its universality. While their causes may differ in focus, they share a common thread: the belief that every individual has a role to play in creating a better world. This message is especially relevant today, as global challenges such as poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation require collective action. By using their platforms to amplify these issues, the Queen and the Dalai Lama inspired countless individuals and organizations to take up the mantle of service. Their example also highlights the importance of leading by example. Neither figure sought recognition or reward for their efforts. Instead, they embodied the principles they espoused. For the Dalai Lama, this meant living simply and advocating tirelessly for peace. For the Queen, it meant dedicating decades of her life to supporting charities, community organizations, and international initiatives. Together, they demonstrated that true leadership is rooted in humility, integrity, and a genuine desire to uplift others. Geopolitical dynamics. At a time when global tensions are escalating, their interactions offer valuable lessons in navigating complexity. Through gestures like hosting the Dalai Lama, the UK demonstrated the power of soft diplomacy. But let's reflect. In today's polarized world, how can we harness the same spirit of dialogue and cooperation? The geopolitical dynamics surrounding their meetings reveal much about the evolving nature of international relations. At a time when hard power, military might, and economic leverage often dominates headlines, the Queen's engagement with the Dalai Lama exemplifies the enduring relevance of soft power. Soft power, defined as the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion, relies on values, culture, and diplomacy. By hosting the Dalai Lama discreetly yet respectfully, the UK showcased its capacity to navigate sensitive issues without resorting to confrontation. This approach offers several key takeaways for modern diplomacy. First, it underscores the importance of nuance and subtlety in addressing contentious issues. Rather than taking a rigid stance, effective diplomacy often requires flexibility and creativity. Second, it highlights the role of personal relationships in building trust and goodwill. The Queen's meetings with the Dalai Lama were not just symbolic. They were opportunities to foster understanding and collaboration at a human level. Furthermore, their interactions serve as a reminder of the interconnectedness of global challenges. Issues like human rights, climate change, and social inequality transcend national borders, requiring coordinated responses from all sectors of society. By engaging with the Dalai Lama, the Queen reinforced the idea that no nation or individual is an island. We are all part of a larger web of relationships, and our actions ripple outward in ways we may not immediately perceive. Finally, their relationship challenges us to rethink traditional notions of power and influence. In an age dominated by populism and polarization, their example reminds us that leadership is not about asserting dominance, but about fostering connections. It's about listening, learning, and finding solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few. As we grapple with the complexities of the 21st century, their legacy offers a roadmap for navigating uncertainty with grace and purpose. Legacy of their interactions. For the monarchy, the Queen's engagement with the Dalai Lama reinforced her image as a unifying figure. Her ability to navigate sensitive situations without compromising core principles earned widespread admiration. Doesn't this remind us that true leadership requires both strength and grace? Let's delve deeper into how these interactions shaped not only her legacy, but also the perception of the monarchy itself. Queen Elizabeth II's meetings with the Dalai Lama demonstrated her unique capacity to balance tradition with modernity, pragmatism with idealism. As a constitutional monarch, she operated within the constraints of protocol while still exercising moral agency, a delicate equilibrium that defined much of her reign. By hosting the Dalai Lama discreetly yet respectfully, she upheld the monarchy's role as a neutral arbiter in international affairs. one capable of fostering goodwill without overtly challenging geopolitical realities. Moreover, these encounters highlighted the monarchy's enduring relevance in an age where its purpose is often questioned. Critics of the institution argue that it is an outdated relic of a bygone era. Yet moments like these underscore its potential to serve as a bridge between cultures, ideologies, and generations. The Queen's willingness to engage with a figure as globally significant as the Dalai Lama reinforced the idea that the monarchy could transcend mere symbolism, offering a platform for meaningful dialogue and cultural exchange. Her actions also set a precedent for future monarchs, emphasizing the importance of ethical leadership in navigating complex global dynamics. In a world increasingly driven by populism and polarization, her example serves as a reminder that institutions, whether royal or otherwise, can play a vital role in promoting unity and understanding. By prioritizing compassion over controversy, she left behind a blueprint for how leaders can wield soft power effectively, earning respect not through force, but through empathy and integrity. For the Dalai Lama, each interaction provided opportunities to amplify the voices of marginalized communities. By cultivating relationships with influential individuals, he strengthened the global network supporting Tibetan autonomy. Isn't it remarkable how one person can ignite change through connection? Yet, the impact of his engagements with Queen Elizabeth II extends far beyond symbolic gestures. It represents a strategic effort to sustain international awareness of Tibet's plight. The Dalai Lama's meetings with the Queen were part of a broader strategy to keep the issue of Tibetan autonomy alive on the global stage. While China has sought to isolate him diplomatically, his ability to connect with world leaders, from presidents and prime ministers to spiritual figures and royalty, has ensured that his message continues to resonate. These interactions have helped transform what might otherwise be seen as a regional conflict into a universal call for justice, human rights, and cultural preservation. Furthermore, the Dalai Lama's relationship with the Queen exemplifies the power of personal diplomacy in building alliances. Each meeting, no matter how private or low-key, sent a clear signal to the international community. The cause of Tibetan autonomy remains relevant and worthy of attention. For marginalized communities around the world, such gestures offer hope, a reminder that their struggles are not forgotten, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Beyond advocacy, these encounters also enrich the Dalai Lama's mission to promote interfaith harmony and mindfulness. Engaging with a Christian monarch who embodied service and humility allowed him to model the kind of cross-cultural understanding he champions. This mutual exchange of ideas not only elevated his profile, but also deepened the resonance of his teachings, demonstrating that spirituality transcends religious boundaries. For the world ultimately, their relationship reminds us of the enduring power of dialogue and understanding. In an increasingly interconnected world, don't we all share a responsibility to build bridges rather than walls? But let's reflect further on what this means, not just in theory, but in practice. At its core, the legacy of their interactions lies in their demonstration of how personal relationships can transcend political divides. In a time when nations often prioritize short-term interests over long-term ideals, the Queen and the Dalai Lama showed that diplomacy need not be transactional. It can be transformative. Their meetings served as a microcosm of what global cooperation might look like if guided by shared values rather than competing agendas. Consider the broader implications for humanity. The challenges we face today, climate change, social inequality, religious intolerance, are inherently interconnected. Addressing them requires collaboration across borders, cultures, and belief systems. The Queen and the Dalai Lama's example reminds us that progress begins with dialogue, with the willingness to listen and learn from those whose perspectives differ from our own. It is a lesson that applies not only to governments and institutions, but to individuals as well. Their legacy also challenges us to rethink the metrics by which we measure success. In a world obsessed with quantifiable outcomes, economic growth, military strength, technological advancement, their relationship underscores the importance of intangible qualities like compassion, empathy, and integrity. These are the values that bind us together, that give meaning to our collective existence. And they are the foundation upon which lasting peace and prosperity must be built. Finally, their story invites us to consider our own roles in shaping the future. If two figures as seemingly distant as a British monarch and a Tibetan Buddhist leader could find common ground, what prevents us from doing the same? Whether in our communities, workplaces, or families, we each have the power to foster understanding and bridge divides. Their legacy is not just a historical footnote. It is a call to action, urging us to embrace our shared humanity and work toward a better, more compassionate world. Conclusion. What can we take away from the meetings between Queen Elizabeth II and the Dalai Lama? They represent a fascinating intersection of tradition, spirituality, and diplomacy. While their encounters were modest compared to other state occasions, they carried profound significance. Here's my final thought. Life is full of complexities, contradictions, and challenges. But perhaps the key to navigating them lies in staying true to our values while remaining open to dialogue. As history continues to unfold, their legacy serves as a testament to the timeless power of compassion, integrity, and hope. So, I leave you with this question. How will you contribute to a more just and compassionate future?